Well, welcome everyone to Conversations for the Common Good. I'm Raquel Webb. I'm manager of spiritual care for the St. Joseph System. And my special guest today is Scott Lester. Scott, tell us who you are and tell us where you are.
My name is Scott Lester. I'm the Mission Integration and Spiritual Care Coordinator Director at St. Luke's Sugarland.
Well, very good. So what we're doing now is I'm taking a trip around Texas, and I'll be joined by a lot of the mission and spiritual care leaders to talk about this. How do we cope through this COVID crisis that we're having? And our topic for conversation today is resiliency. Scott, can you start by telling us, what does resiliency mean?
Sure. Resiliency is really a person's ability to respond to the pressures and demands of daily life. And it also includes our ability to recover from difficult and traumatic, painful experiences. To really put it in the most simple terms, it's our ability to bounce back. I also think that there's a perception that people are either born with resiliency or not. But really, people possess varying degrees of resiliency based on their personal backgrounds. And we also need to understand that resiliency is not just a passive quality, but an active one. And so we can develop and strengthen resiliency over time. But we also need to be aware that because it's an active quality, it can also weaken and wane over time as well. So we have to constantly take steps to maintain our resiliency.
Okay, so I want to pick up with what you said, that we're not either born with resiliency or we don't have resiliency, but we have some varying degrees of resiliency, if I understood you correctly. Can you tell us why that is? Why aren't we all born with full resiliency caps? Why do some of us have less and some of us have more?
Well, it's kind of the way our brain is designed to work. There's a term when we talk about resiliency called brain bias or negative bias. And this is really the tendency for our brain to give far greater detail and significance to negative events rather than positive ones. Now, this was a biological function of our brain that was critical when our literal survival depended on being aware of the dangers around us. But now we live in a relatively safe world, but our brains still call attention to the negative while screening out the positive. We also tend to process negative events for longer and in more detail than we do positive events. Dr. Rick Hanson wrote a book a while back called Buddha's Brain, The Practical Neuroscience of Happiness, Love, and Wisdom. I love the way he put it. He said, our brains are like Velcro for negative events and Teflon for positive ones.
Right. And I remember in the last episode, Tyler and I discussed this as well, that negative thoughts and feelings take up more space in our heart than positive ones. So it's interesting that that's a natural way that our brain just goes. So in different degrees of resiliency happening in people, can you give us some examples of someone who has high resiliency? What is that person like? What are some qualities of a person with high resiliency?
So there are some definable characteristics for a person that has a high sense of resiliency. The first characteristic that they have is that they know themselves. They're very aware of their faults, their humanity, their vulnerability, but they don't let that hinder them. They resist the idea that failing means that they're a failure. Rather they see failure as an opportunity to learn, grow, making changes and improvements. They also have a mental flexibility. Being resilient doesn't mean that you're immune to negative thoughts, but you are self-aware enough to recognize them when they manifest themselves and acknowledge their counterproductivity. They also avoid jumping to conclusions and making snap judgments. Rather, they're very measured. They gather facts that are needed to face a challenge. They make adjustments, and they continually make adjustments until the best plan is in place. And they're able to distinguish between what is within their control and what is not in their control. And they take a hold of those things that they control while acknowledging those things that are not. Resilient people also tend to be mostly optimistic. Now, this doesn't mean that they bury their heads in the sand and pretend there's no problems. They do see risks and they take steps to prevent any problems that may arise. However, they do not see setbacks as the end of the world. And when faced with a challenge, they're more likely to say, I can get through this. And the reason they're able to do that is because they're able to name the support that they have around them. They tend to know their strengths. So, everyone has innate strengths and everything, but resilient people are able to tap into those strengths, and they get a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy around using them, and so they use their strengths to really address the things that they can control. And then they're also very connected to others. They recognize that they do not have everything they need, and thus they really need other people. And so they have a network of close friends and are not afraid to ask for help. That's really key. A really key concept in resiliency is that they understand that when they have a need, they have the capacity to ask for help and not be ashamed of asking for help. And they're also willing to talk out their problems with others, and they regularly work on strengthening those key relationships.
Awesome. Okay, so let's say I'm listening to this and I want those qualities. I want to be that resilient person that you just described and those things that you said. How do I get there, Scott? How do I become a more resilient person?
So, like I said before, at the very beginning, resiliency is something that can strengthen and weaken based on circumstances. And so we can take some very practical steps to build resiliency for a reserve of resiliency for those times when we are at our most stressed and most vulnerable. I think the first thing that we need to do is we have to know our current level of resiliency. And one of the ways that you can do that is we have a link in the resources to a self-assessment. It takes about 10-15 minutes to do, and it'll give you a really quick snapshot of where you are as far as your resiliency level. So knowing where you are and as on that continuum of resiliency is the first step. The second thing is that we have to recognize that brain bias, that negative bias, when it exists, when those negative thoughts begin to creep in, when we start to go to the doom and gloom and worst case scenarios, we have to name that as counterproductive and kind of fight against that on a regular basis. The other thing that we need to do is savor positive experiences. Remember, I mentioned that for negative experiences, we tend to process for longer and in more detail. Whereas for some reason, positive experiences, we go, oh, that was nice. And we tend to move on very quickly. So when you notice something good, let yourself have time to enjoy it. And savor that moment and then share it with someone else. Because one of the really cool things is that when you have a positive experience and you share it with someone else, they actually experience that positive experience vicariously through your storytelling. One of the ways that you can practice savoring the moment is by what's called hunting the good stuff. There's a 3-step process to this. Step 1 is that you set aside time each day to record at least 3 good things that happened during the day, and then you reflect on it. You reflect on why did that good thing happen? Why was it important to me? What can I do tomorrow to see that good thing happen again? And then what can I do to contribute to other good things happening, not only to me, but to other folks around me? And then finally, the 3rd step goes back to what I said, is to share those good things with other people. And again, what happens is that as you share those, you relive that experience. It hardwires it into your brain, but you also transfer that experience to the other person as well. I think it's also important to remember this important ratio, 5-to-1. Good events can overcome negative psychological events, but we have to have at least 5 good events to offset every 1 negative event. So you want to make sure that you're constantly looking for those good those good events. I remember when I went to summer camp with some youth one time, and the leader every day said, I need you to have 5 meaningful touches during the day: a high five, a handshake, a pat on the back, or whatever. And so we would find throughout the day opportunities to engage in encouraging each other. And so I always came up with a creative handshake each day that I made the youth that were with me do. But again, a way to offset those negatives, that 5-to-1 ratio. Make sure you try to scatter some simple pleasures throughout the day. If you're stuck in a building all day, try to get out and take a walk outside. If there's music you like to listen to, set aside some time just to listen to your favorite song, or enjoy your favorite snack. But scatter those simple pleasures throughout the day. One of the things I love about where I work is that right behind our hospital is a bayou. And I usually park out in the parking lot right by the bayou. And sometimes in the afternoons after I get off work, I'll go out to my truck and I'll just sit in my truck and look at the bayou and watch the ducks and alligators and stuff pass by. And it's just a very relaxing opportunity. But it's one of those simple pleasures that you can scatter throughout the day. And then finally, I think you'll hear this a lot from a lot of people, but you have to maintain a balanced. You have to maintain balanced self-care. And I think one of the resources that we have is a self-care wheel that you can look at, and it looks at the different areas and offers some suggestions about how you can take care of yourself in a balanced way. Because I think sometimes we tend to focus on 1 or 2 areas and neglect others. And so I encourage you to look at that resource as well.
Wow, what a breath of fresh air. Such practical tips. This is awesome. I'm actually going to, as soon as we get off of this video, take that self-assessment. I'm curious myself. And I had never heard of the hunting the good stuff. So I wrote those 3 steps down. I hope you at home did too. But we need this, right? There's no reason that at this point we need to be stuck in a rut. And so, Scott, I appreciate the steps that you gave us, that we really can build our resiliency up to where we're living better lives, that we're more satisfied with ourselves. And again, what you said at the beginning, when we get this step built up, that we'll be able to bounce back, right, when something hits us. So thank
Absolutely.
you so much, Scott, for your expertise. And so I want to remind everyone watching that attached to the link to this video is our link of resources. You'll want to check that out. And don't forget, at each of your locations, that your chaplains are available to you to help you work through these things and help you build resilience. Ask any of us also how to contact your EAP, and we know that number. So from all of us in spiritual care around Texas, we wish you well. See you next time for Conversations for the Common Good. And Scott, say goodbye to our listeners.
Y'all, it's been a pleasure to do this, and thank you, and y'all have a great day.